Hang on, it's about to get nuts. First orbit, I pick up ace-8 suited under the gun. No waiting around, I'm getting involved right away. I open to 35. The talking stick is just how I remembered it. No one likes to fold. The button calls, the small blind calls, the big blind calls. We're going 4 ways to the flop. The dealer puts out ace-5-3 with 2 hearts. We flop top pair and the nut flush draw in a multi-way pot. Small blind and big blind check. I don't need to bet too large. I'm happy to keep people in with a variety of weak holdings since my hand has a ton of potential to improve even from top pair. I make it 60. In the history of Arizona poker, no one has ever won a pot with a flop bet. The button calls quickly. Small blind wants to put us to the test. He raises to 200. It's a somewhat odd sizing considering he's up against 2 opponents who have already put money in on the flop, with a third opponent that still has cards, and the raiser is out of position on everyone. If he has a made hand and wants to charge draws, he's certainly not making it too much for us to see additional cards. The big blind folds. It's on me. This is a situation in which plenty of people tend to overplay their hands. I have a strong combo draw, but I don't need to inflate the pot at the moment. The small blind could have a set, 2 pair, or an ace with a better kicker that he raised with for value. He won't be folding most or possibly any of those combinations if I put in a re-raise. Could also have a weaker flush draw or a bluff with something even worse. Those hands will be drawing extremely thin and I want to keep them in. For that reason, I call for 140 more. If I had a set, this would be a different story and I'd be trying to pile in as much money as possible. The button folds. It's now heads up with the small blind. The turn is the 8 of spades. We have top 2 pair to go along with our draw. Now we're beating a lot of the combos that the small blind may have check raised for value. He doesn't let up though. He fires for 400. To make sure that I keep the opponent's bluffs in, I call again. I still might be up against a set. The river is a miracle deuce of hearts. Got better on every street for us. It's like I'm back in San Francisco walking away from the Tenderloin. I'm trying to hold back my excitement. Meanwhile, the opponent isn't fazed by 3 hearts or 4 to the straight on board. He bets 600. Remember, this is a spread limit game, so that's the max that you can bet. I have 780 total. Guess what?
One. Great. All in.
Takes a little while to get all the chips in. It's only 180 more for the small blind to call, and he seems reluctant to do so. It's safe to say that I'm not up against 6-4 of hearts. Or maybe I am, and this is the sickest slow roll ever. Eventually the player calls for a tiny bit more. I turn over the cards. We get a little redemption with ace-8 suited, since in the previous vlog I turned the nut flush with ace-8 of spades, and I lost a big pot when the opponent rivered a boat. You can see the small blind show his neighbor what he had. Usually the rule is if you show one player you have to show all. The guy just lost a big pot, so it's not good etiquette to ask him to show the whole table, but later the player on his right would tell me that the small blind had 4 deuce and flopped the straight. He's a bit in disbelief that he lost and got an unfortunate run out. I'm pumped to get a double up 10 minutes into the session. I was considering adding on. There's no need to anymore. We've got about 3,000 in front of us and we're just getting started. After getting some sleep, I jump into my 4th session of the trip when I pick up ace-6 suited in the hijack. The player on my right min raises to 10. He's been playing almost every hand. I want to isolate him. I 3-bet to 35. My buddy Jeff calls in the cutoff. The small blind is a vlog watcher named Tim who transferred over to get some Bradley dollars and possibly make it onto the video. He calls. The initial pre-flop raiser calls as well. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It's queen 10-4 with 2 clubs. We get the nut flush draw, a backdoor straight draw, and 1 over. Checks to me. There's a good flop for my range and my actual hand. I bet 105 to either win now or increase the size of the pot in case I'm able to improve. The cutoff folds. Tim calls in the small blind. The middle position player calls as well. The table has been playing very loose, particularly the middle position player. 3 of us are seeing the turn. The dealer puts out the king of hearts, gives us a gutter to go along with our flush draw. Checks to me again. I shouldn't be semi-bluffing in this spot, especially against multiple opponents. Someone could have ace-jack, jack-9, or king-queen. The more I think about it, the more I don't like it. In Vegas, I'd always check this back. Here, I wouldn't be surprised to be up against some weak suited queens or suited 10s, as ridiculous as that sounds. I fire for 275 to get people who don't like to fold, to hopefully fold. Not a great plan. Small blind calls, leaving himself with 350 behind. The middle position player also calls, leaving himself with 117 behind. We're going to need to hit a jack or a club if we want to keep our winning streak alive. This has become a massive pot. The river is a miracle jack of clubs. We make the nut flush and make a straight just as a bonus. It gets better though. Tim rips it in for 350. I'm trying not to show too much excitement while the other opponent is figuring out what he wants to do. Ultimately, the middle position player calls. He's all in as well. I snap call and turn over the nuts. The player on the left with the red phone also watches the channel, and the player to his right is a viewer as well. He actually came to a meetup game that Andrew and I did in South Dakota. It's a table filled with vlog watchers who have a front row seat to see me win an enormous 3-way all-in. I got bailed out after a terrible turn bet. The small blind Tim shows that he has king jack of diamonds. He flopped a straight draw, turned top pair, and river 2 pair. I'm not sure what the middle position player has, but he said that he couldn't beat an ace high straight. Back on the felt, I'm at my 5th table of the night. I pick up ace king suited on the button. The small blind straddles for 10. The big blind calls. A middle position player limps in. I raise to 50. Small blind folds, then the big blind gives his cards to the dealer, and as he does, I think I see one of his cards flash, but I'm not exactly certain what it is. The middle position player calls to 50. I'm torn whether or not to speak up on what I believe I saw. I end up doing what I think is the right thing. I think I saw you. Did you have the ace of hearts, sir? Did you have a red ace?
I did have a red ace.
Red ace exposed.
Good karma.
Good karma it is, because the flop comes ace queen 5 with 2 clubs. We've got top, and the nut flush draw. The world is our oyster. The opponent checks with 3 aces accounted for and lots of clubs accounted for too. I don't know what I can get called by. Also, there aren't really any turn cards that I'm concerned about seeing. Plus, I'm in position, so I do a sneaky check back. The turn is the 7 of clubs. We've got the nuts. The player checks. It's time to build up this pot. I bet 60. I'm expecting the opponent to fold. That's not what happens. He's full of surprises. He calls. I don't really know what he has. The river is the deuce of clubs. It's 1 more than I needed. Please take 1 club back, dealer. We don't get anything special for a 6-card flush. The player checks. Not sure how I'm going to get paid, so I might as well try to make it look like I'm bluffing, and I fire for 150. Maybe the middle position player can have like the jack high flush. We get some good news. He surprisingly snap calls. Pretty good karma. Nice. We win a nice pot, and our stack is at nearly 2,000. Now we have ace 10 of diamonds in the small blind. It's a straddle pot. Middle position player limps in for 10. The hijack raises to 35. I call, the limper calls, we go 3 ways to the flop, and it comes jack 6-6 with 2 diamonds. It's our 4th flush draw of the day. We haven't hit any of the previous ones. I check. Middle position player checks. The hijack bets 55. I'm gonna stick around. I call. Middle position player folds. We're heads up with a pre-flop raiser. The turn is an ace. We make top pair to go along with our draw. I check, expecting it to check back a lot if the opponent has something like kings, queens, king jack, queen jack, or jack 10. He doesn't check back. He bets 110. This is strange to me. He's either bluffing the flop with a hand like ace king and has me beat, or he's saying he has pocket aces, pocket jacks, a 6, or ace jack. It's also possible he's completely bluffing, and it kind of feels that way. I call. The river is the 7 of hearts. We break another flush draw. I check. The hijack snap jams for 320. The fact that it didn't even take time to think about it makes me very suspicious. The issue is that I don't beat a single hand that he's betting for value. My kicker doesn't even play. I called a $200 river bet earlier and was wrong. I don't want to call and be wrong again. I'm on the fence. I'm looking for anything to sway me in either direction. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that the opponent is wearing a Santa hat. You can't trust a grown man wearing a Santa hat at the poker table. I make the call. Christmas has come early for us. The hijack flips over 10-4 of clubs for nothing at any point in the hand. He must have been after those Bradley dollars hard, and he got straight punished. I was put to the test, but I made the right decision for a big pot. We're all the way out of the hole, and we're actually up 210. The last table of the night, I'm dealt ace queen of diamonds under the gun +1. Under the gun limps in, I raised to 15. Under the gun +2 calls, the small blind calls, and the limper calls as well. We go 4 ways to the flop. Comes 10-5-4 with 2 diamonds. We have the nut flush draw, 2 overs, and a backdoor straight draw. Small blind and under the gun players both check. If this were heads up, then I'd bet it. Since we're multi-way, I go ahead and check. It's tough to get through 3 players on a board that typically isn't going to connect well with my under the gun +1 pre-flop raising range. Also, this check is a bit for deception. My opponents may not expect me to check the nut flush draw, so if I hit, it could be easier for me to get called lighter down the road. Under the gun +2 checks back. The turn is a queen. We improve the top pair and top kicker. Small blind checks. Under the gun bets 16. This is obviously very small. I doubt that he would have bet that amount on a draw heavy board with multiple opponents if he had a hand that was stronger than mine. I put in a raise to 50. Under the gun +2 folds. The small blind calls. This is interesting. He probably has some sort of draw himself. The action's back on the under the gun player. He jams for 245 total. My initial read on the situation was that under the gun couldn't have been that strong once he bet 16. I'm still not totally convinced that he is. Either way, I've got a lot going for my hand if for some reason I'm not already best. I'm certainly going to stick around. There's no need for me to re-raise to isolate. I call the 245, hoping the small blind may call as well with a worse flush draw. The small blind deliberates for a bit, then eventually puts in calling chips. Him and I will be heads up for a potential side pot. It'd be great to hit a diamond here on the river, and we absolutely drill it. The dealer puts out the jack of diamonds, giving us the nuts. It's already a large pot, but it could get much bigger if the small blind happened to have hit a flush too. Please pull the trigger and rip it. I can tell he's thinking about it. He finally comes to a decision.
Okay. All in. All.
I don't think that I've ever gotten my chips in faster. I flipped over my cards immediately, so I never saw what the small blind had, but he'd later tell me it was Jack-9 offsuit and that he was attempting to turn his river pair into a bluff. That's a big mistake since there's a third player who was already all in. That means the small blind was attempting a bluff to win a dry side pot. You never want to do that since you still have to show down your hand and win against a third player to take down the main pot, which is the only pot with money in it. We capitalize on an extremely fortunate string of events. We're up 2,700 tonight. It's by far the most that I've ever been up in 1-3 before. Here we've got ace-king suited in the cutoff, under the gun +1 limps in. I raised to 20, the small blind is wearing money repellent, and it seems to be working effectively as $20 comes off of his stack that he'll never be seeing again. Under the gun +1 calls also, we're going 3 ways to the flop. The dealer puts out ace-8-3 with 2 spades, we've got top with a flush draw. The small blind leads with a small bet of 15, which will 100% be getting raised. Under the gun +1 folds. We don't want to raise too much because we definitely like the small blind to stick around. I go with a sizing of 50. The small blind doesn't seem to be considering putting in a re-raise. He just calls for 35 more. Probably has a worse draw or a 1-pair hand at best. The dealer is a Beyonce fan and is singing "Let Me Upgrade You" as she puts out the 10 of spades, giving us the nuts. Small blind checks. We're now tasked with determining a bet size that'll help us get the maximum value while being careful not to induce a fold. It's really important to make sure that we get called in this case since our opponent is likely drawing dead. I bet 70. This amount does the trick. The small blind calls. We've got him hooked. The river is another 8, pairs the board so we no longer have the best possible hand. Still, we're very strong and there's no reason to believe that the opponent has us beat with a full house. Small blind checks. Again, we need to get max value, but we don't want to overdo it. I ultimately go with a sizing of 225. Our opponent doesn't like it even a little bit. His name is Nicky Rings because he likes dressing up his fingers. The small blind figures that he might be beat. He just can't help himself though. He calls, we turn over our monster. It gives us the victory. We get about the most value possible, especially when we hear how light we got called on the river.
Nick Rings.
Pocket queens.
I make mental note not to try and bluff Nicky. We take down the pot to get unstuck for the day. We're actually up several hundred. 30 hands later, Barry raises to 500 from under the gun. Kuz makes a pretty standard call here with King 4 offsuit from under the gun +2 if he were playing blind. Given that he's not playing blind though, solvers mostly mix in folding and folding. We pick up ace-9 suited in the cutoff and 3-bet to 2,500 while the third Nick game is going on. We've upped the price you have to pay to everyone. If you lose, you have to give each player $2,000 because why not make it 20 times the size of the big blind? If anyone is due, it's us. I believe I'm in for $80,000 at this point. It's much more than I was anticipating, but I've actually been playing well considering everything that's been happening, and the potential to win a big hand is so high that I can't justify leaving the table. Our 3-bet should fold out the exact hands that our opponents voluntarily put chips in the middle with so far, though I don't expect Barry to fold a suited ace in this game. He calls, not unreasonable. Kuz just doesn't want to give up any 2 cards with either letters or numbers on them. He calls for 2,000 more. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It comes 10-6-4 with 2 clubs. We've got a draw to the nuts with an overcard and a backdoor straight draw. It's actually the flop that I've been most excited about seeing today after nearly 5 hours of playing. Barry checks. He's got nothing. Kuz has bottom pair. It's not much either. He also checks. The action's on us. We want to build a pot up and give ourselves a chance to get out of the Nick game. I bet 3,000. There's nothing Barry can do. He folds. The action is on Kuz, and he snap jams for 24,000 effective. I call immediately because I've seen the things Kuz has been doing, and I expect to be ahead some of the time if he has some sort of draw himself. If not, I'll have outs. If I win, I can avoid paying out an extra 14,000. As it is, it's exactly a coin flip situation. We agree to run it 2 times for the $55,000 pot. The turn is the King of Hearts. Why wouldn't it be? Kuz has top and bottom pair. I'm drawing dead to a club. The river is the 8 of clubs, so we finally make the nuts to secure half the pot. We're at least not getting stacked. Let me hit an ace or a club 1 time on this next one. This is still one of the largest pots that I've ever played. The second turn is another 4 to give Kuz trips. Why wouldn't it be? I'm drawing dead to a club. If I scoop it, I'll finally avoid losing the Nick game for the first time today and at the new studio. If I don't hit a club, I don't avoid losing the Nick game since we agreed to run it twice. The river is the 8 of spades. We chop the pot. It's another ridiculous one that results in us ending up about where we started. We just chop up Barry's pre-flop 3-bet call. You can see it on my face that I'm not having a good time today. It's even more frustrating because it's the inaugural stream. Everyone else is having fun and taking down occasional pots. Meanwhile, I'm in the midst of my biggest loss ever for the first stream in the new studio at a card club where I'm part owner to more than double my biggest downswing that I've had in 20 years of playing poker. Next we've got ace-9 of diamonds in middle position. The under the gun player raises to 30. I like playing suited aces when there's a lot of money on the table. I call to see if we can make a flush. The opponent from the last hand is in the big blind. He 3-bets to 130. The under the gun player calls for 100 more. There are a couple things going through my mind right now. The first is that I already saw the big blind 3-bet and then call a 4-bet with a suspect hand. It seems like he just enjoys playing larger pots and creating action. It doesn't necessarily mean that he has a premium. Against someone like this, I'm more inclined to get involved with a wider range, especially from in position. Also, this isn't a very large 3-bet sizing. I'm getting an even better price now that the under the gun player is called. It will be closing the action, so I'm even more interested in seeing a flop. I call for 100 more. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. It comes 10-5-4 with 2 diamonds. We've got the flush draw with 1 over and a backdoor wheel draw. The big blind enjoys TikTok. I just started regularly uploading on my account, Brado and Poker, all one word. While we're in a hand against each other, the big blind is looking at his phone, doing some last-second research to see how I play.
So you hit that royal flush. I just watched the TikTok on the royal flush. That was cool. It wasn't a big hand.
Whoa, I see what's going on here. The opponent is pot-shaming me for how little I won with the royal in order to demoralize me as he bets 100 to potentially steal the pot right before our eyes. It's a shrewd tactic, but it's not going to work this time. No. Under the gun folds, we've got a big piece and we're getting a great price. I call looking to improve. It's down to heads up. The turn is the king of diamonds giving us the nuts. The big blind slider to adjust the bet sizing is broken. He's forced to go with 100 again. No one is going to make it to the river for 1/6 the pot. I raised to 300. He grabs chips to call with a speed that rivals only the top alien spacecraft. I can't wait for him to see this hand on TikTok. The river is the 6 of spades. Like a selfish squirrel, we keep the nuts. The big blind checks with how fast he called the turn raise, and given the fact that a lot of the diamonds are accounted for, I put him on a top pair type of hand. He clearly didn't even consider folding against me. My take on the situation is that he incorrectly folded a pair once when I was semi-bluffing. Now that he knows I have dozens of views on TikTok, he's not going to be folding a pair to me again. I've got the green light to go for a much larger sizing, but I don't want to go too large. I bet 900 and get called before the chips are cut. We show him the best possible hand. While the opponent mucks, he shows what looks to be a 10. He could have had a set of 10s or king 10, but he probably wouldn't have bet only 100 on the turn, and he likely would have taken more time to contemplate re-raising at that point, rather than snap call the 300 if he really had something strong. The general vibe I get as the pot is pushed our direction is that we got called light, and there's maybe a little embarrassment that the opponent didn't take more time with his decisions, rather than a big cooler just occurred. I imagine we probably got called by just second pair. It's another big win for us.